After divorce, a lonely wife finds herself beside Millionaire, and her life changes forever. Emma thought her life had hit rock bottom after a painful divorce, but what started as a night of drowning her sorrows turned into something she never expected. Waking up in a billionaire's home, she found herself drawn into a world of unexpected challenges, hidden truths, and a chance to rebuild everything she thought she'd lost. What unfolds next is a journey of resilience, love, and personal discovery that will leave you inspired. The courtroom smelled of polished wood and stale disappointment. Emma Carter sat at the edge of the bench, her back stiff, despite the ache building between her shoulders. The room was too cold, the hum of the air conditioning too loud, and the drone of the lawyer's voice too sharp against her ears. Her divorce was nearly final. Just a few more signatures, a few more platitudes from the judge about fairness and amicability, and she would no longer be Emma Blake, no longer married to Connor Blake, the man who had once been the center of her world. She clenched her hands in her lap, her nails pressing crescents into the flesh of her palms. The papers in front of her blurred as her eyes welled with tears she refused to shed. Not here, she thought, swallowing hard. Not in front of Connor, who sat across from her with the same casual confidence he had carried throughout their entire relationship. His expensive suit was perfectly pressed, his gold cufflinks gleaming under the fluorescent lights. He looked more like he was closing a business deal than ending a marriage. The judge cleared his throat, breaking the silence that had stretched uncomfortably long. "Ms. Carter, are you prepared to sign?" Emma blinked and looked up, realizing the entire room was waiting for her. Her lawyer, a kind but overwhelmed woman named Laura, leaned over and whispered, "It's just a formality. Sign here, and it's over." Over. The word echoed in Emma's mind like the final toll of a bell. She picked up the pen with a trembling hand, her signature looping unevenly across the bottom of the page. With that single act, her 10-year marriage dissolved into nothing more than legal jargon and a few crisp pages of paper. Connor didn't even flinch. He stood smoothly, buttoning his suit jacket as if he were leaving a meeting. "Take care of yourself, Emma," he said, his tone devoid of emotion. And then he was gone, his polished loafers clicking against the floor as he walked out of her life. Emma stayed seated long after the room emptied, her hand still gripping the pen. The silence pressed against her like a physical weight, making it hard to breathe. Laura sat beside her, placing a hand on her arm. "It's normal to feel like this. Take your time." Normal. Nothing about this felt normal. Emma felt as if her entire identity had been stripped away, leaving her raw and exposed. She was no longer a wife, no longer part of a partnership she had built her life around. The betrayal that had led her here, Connor's affair with a younger, blonder, and somehow always perfect associate, was a wound that refused to heal. "I'll be fine," Emma said finally, her voice cracking. She stood and gathered her things, her movements robotic. The courthouse steps loomed ahead, and with each one she descended, the gravity of her new reality pulled her deeper into herself. The city was alive with its usual chaos, oblivious to the cracks in her world. Yellow cabs honked as they weaved through traffic, and the chatter of pedestrians blurred into a hum of background noise. Emma walked aimlessly, her heels clicking against the concrete, her mind a storm of thoughts she couldn't quiet. Her phone buzzed in her purse, a reminder of the life she was supposed to return to. Deadlines, clients, meetings. She silenced the notification without looking at it, the weight of her responsibilities feeling more suffocating than ever. "Emma!" A familiar voice called out, pulling her from her daze. She turned to see Natalie Rivera, her best friend, hurrying toward her with a concerned expression. Natalie's dark hair was pulled into a sleek ponytail, and her tailored blazer screamed competence, everything Emma felt she wasn't. "I was about to storm into the courthouse to find you," Natalie said, wrapping Emma in a firm hug. "How are you holding up?" Emma let out a hollow laugh. "I signed the papers. It's done. So, I'm great." Natalie pulled back, her brown eyes narrowing. "You don't have to do this, you know. Pretend you're okay." Emma's facade cracked, and tears she had been holding back slipped down her cheeks. "I don't even know who I am anymore, Natty. Everything I built, everything I worked for, it feels like none of it mattered." Natalie sighed, guiding Emma to a nearby cafe. She ordered for both of them black coffee for Emma, a chai latte for herself, and sat across from her in the corner booth. "Listen to me," Natalie said, her tone firm but kind. "You are more than that man. You were always more. You're talented, brilliant, and stronger than you think." Emma stared into her coffee, her reflection distorted by the swirling liquid. She wanted to believe Natalie's words, but all she could see was the woman Connor had left her for. All she could hear was his dismissive tone when he told her she wasn't enough, not ambitious enough, not exciting enough, not young enough. That evening, after Natalie left her with promises of a better tomorrow, Emma returned to her empty apartment. The space felt cavernous, every room echoing with memories of a life that no longer existed. She poured herself a glass of wine, then another, her thoughts spiraling into the abyss of what-ifs and should-haves. By the time she finished the bottle, her vision was blurred, and her limbs felt heavy. She grabbed her coat and stumbled out into the night, the city lights blinding in their intensity. She didn't know where she was going, only that she couldn't stay still. The last thing she remembered was the soft hum of jazz from a bar she hadn't noticed before, the warm glow of its sign cutting through the haze of her thoughts. The Velvet Room. She stepped inside, her head spinning, her heart heavy. What she didn't know was that this impulsive, reckless decision would change everything. Emma woke to the soft sound of waves lapping against the shore. For a moment, she felt weightless, as though floating in the calm between dreams and reality. But as her senses sharpened, the weight of her body returned, pressing into the plush surface beneath her. Her head throbbed in steady, punishing beats, and her throat felt parched, as if she had swallowed a mouthful of sand. She opened her eyes slowly, blinking against the golden sunlight streaming through an oversized window. The room around her was unfamiliar, modern and opulent, with floor-to-ceiling windows framing a breathtaking view of the ocean. Everything was impossibly pristine, the white linen curtains fluttering in the sea breeze, the sleek marble floors, and the muted grey furniture that seemed more suited to a design magazine than real life. Emma sat up too quickly, her head spinning as last night came rushing back. The Velvet Room, the warmth of jazz in the background, too many glasses of wine spilling over the edges of her control, a man's sharp suit, piercing gaze, a voice like smooth velvet. She pressed her fingers to her temples, trying to piece together the fractured puzzle of the night. "Good, you're awake." The voice startled her, and she turned sharply, wincing at the sharp pain in her neck. A man stood in the doorway, holding a tray with a glass of water and 2 small pills. He was taller than she remembered, his shoulders broad beneath a crisp, open-collared shirt. His hair was dark and slightly disheveled, as if he had run his fingers through it too many times. But it was his eyes, strikingly blue, like the waters beyond the window, that held her attention. "You," Emma stammered, gripping the edge of the bed. "Who are you? Where am I?" He approached slowly, placing the tray on the bedside table. "Liam Harrington," he said, his voice calm but laced with a hint of curiosity. "You're at my home in the Hamptons. You were... well, let's just say you weren't in any condition to get yourself home last night." The name hit her like a jolt of electricity. Everyone in New York knew who Liam Harrington was, billionaire tech mogul, founder of one of the most innovative AI companies in the world, a man whose name was whispered in boardrooms and splashed across magazine covers. But what on earth was she doing in his home? Emma's cheeks burned with embarrassment as snippets of the night resurfaced. She remembered spilling her drink on him, no less, and slurring some incoherent apology. The memory made her stomach churn, though that might have been the hangover. I'm so sorry," Emma stuttered, her hands gripping the blanket tightly. "I didn't mean to—" "You don't need to apologize," Liam interrupted, his tone firm but not unkind. "I found you outside the bar. You were trying to hail a cab, but it was clear you weren't going to get far in your state, so I brought you here." Emma's brow furrowed, her embarrassment giving way to suspicion. "Why? Why not just call me a cab or something?" Liam shrugged, his expression unreadable. "You passed out before I could. It didn't seem right to leave you there, so I made the call." The silence between them stretched uncomfortably as Emma processed his words. She didn't know whether to feel grateful or humiliated or both. Her gaze dropped to her hands, the chipped polish on her nails suddenly fascinating. "Well, thank you," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'll get out of your way now." "You're in no condition to leave," Liam said matter-of-factly, gesturing to the glass of water and pills. "Drink that. It'll help with the headache." Emma hesitated, but eventually reached for the glass, her hands trembling slightly. The water was cool and soothing against her dry throat, and the pill's painkillers, she assumed, offered the promise of relief. Still, she couldn't shake the overwhelming sense of awkwardness that hung in the air. "So, Emma Carter," Liam said, his tone lighter now, as if testing the waters, "what brings you to the Velvet Room on a Wednesday night?" Emma's head snapped up, her eyes narrowing. "How do you know my name?" Liam arched an eyebrow, his lips curving into a faint smile. "Your ID fell out of your purse when I helped you into my car. I didn't rifle through your things, if that's what you're worried about." Emma's face flushed again, though this time with irritation rather than embarrassment. "Well, since you seem to know so much about me, let me return the favor. Liam Harrington, billionaire, genius, probably owns more homes than anyone should reasonably have. Am I missing anything?" Liam chuckled, the sound low and warm. "Not bad, though you left out rescuer of tipsy strangers." Emma shot him a sharp look, but the corner of her mouth twitched despite herself. "Thanks for the reminder." The conversation lapsed into silence again, but this time it felt less strained. Liam leaned against the doorway, his gaze thoughtful as he studied her. "You're different," he said finally. Emma frowned. "Different how?" "Most people would have been too awestruck or embarrassed to speak the way you just did, but you're direct, honest." He paused, his smile fading. "It's refreshing." Emma didn't know how to respond to that. She was used to being underestimated, dismissed, or ignored by her ex-husband, by clients, by most people who only saw her as a pleasant but unremarkable woman. Hearing someone as accomplished as Liam Harrington call her refreshing felt strangely disarming. "Well," Emma said, her voice tinged with sarcasm, "glad to know I've left an impression." Liam straightened, his expression softening. "You should rest. There's breakfast downstairs when you're ready." Before Emma could reply, he turned and walked out, leaving her alone with her thoughts. She stared at the empty doorway, her mind spinning. The man who had carried her out of the chaos of last night wasn't what she expected. He was sharp, yes, but there was something else, something guarded, almost vulnerable, beneath his composed exterior. Emma sank back into the pillows, exhaustion tugging at her. This wasn't how she had planned to start her first day as a divorced woman, but then again, nothing about her life was going as planned. As sleep began to pull her under, one thought lingered at the edge of her consciousness. Who is Liam Harrington, really? And why does it feel like meeting him is just the beginning of something far more complicated? The smell of coffee drifted up the staircase, rich and inviting, tugging Emma from the uneasy haze of her nap. Her body felt heavy, as though the weight of her new reality, divorce, humiliation, and now waking up in a billionaire's mansion, had settled deep into her bones. She swung her legs over the edge of the bed, her bare feet brushing against the cool marble floor. She paused, letting the quiet opulence of the room wash over her again. The window framed an endless expanse of ocean, its waves lapping rhythmically against the shore. Emma stared at the scene, trying to anchor herself. It felt surreal, like stepping into someone else's life. How did I end up here? She thought again, the question echoing in her mind. Her stomach growled, breaking the stillness. Reluctantly she stood and found her shoes near the foot of the bed, neatly placed as if by invisible hands. Her wrinkled dress from the night before clung to her like a bad memory. She tried smoothing it down but gave up with a sigh, pulling her cardigan tighter around her shoulders instead. She hesitated at the door, her hand resting on the cool brass handle. "What's the worst that could happen?" she muttered under her breath before stepping out. The house seemed even larger in the daylight, its open layout accentuating the sweeping ceilings and sleek modern lines. Emma followed the sound of soft jazz and clinking dishes, the music punctuated by the gentle roar of the ocean outside. She found herself in an expansive kitchen, its white countertops gleaming under the natural light pouring in through a wall of windows. Liam stood by the stove, flipping something in a skillet with the ease of someone who had done it 1,000 times. He looked impossibly put together, his crisp shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms. He glanced over his shoulder as she entered, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Morning," he said. "How's the head?" Emma hesitated, her hand gripping the back of a chair. "Better, thanks. You didn't have to cook." Liam shrugged, turning back to the stove. "It's just eggs and toast. Not exactly groundbreaking." She sat, unsure of what to say. The space between them felt charged, like an unsaid question lingered in the air. Emma watched him move with practiced precision, setting a plate of scrambled eggs and golden brown toast in front of her before sliding into the seat across from her. They ate in silence for a moment, the quiet punctuated only by the occasional scrape of utensils. Emma's appetite returned with surprising force, and she finished her plate before realizing she hadn't thanked him. "This is good," she said awkwardly, breaking the silence. "Thanks." Liam looked up, his expression amused. "You say that like you weren't expecting it." Emma flushed, her fingers fiddling with the hem of her sleeve. "I just mean, it's not every day someone like you makes breakfast for someone like me." Liam's amusement faded, replaced by a flicker of something she couldn't quite place. "What do you mean by that? Someone like me?" Emma hesitated, choosing her words carefully. You're you, billionaire, genius, owner of this ridiculous house. And I'm just—" She stopped, swallowing the lump in her throat. "I'm just a mess." Liam leaned back in his chair, studying her. "You're too hard on yourself." Emma laughed bitterly, shaking her head. "Trust me, if you'd seen the last year of my life, you'd get it." His gaze didn't waver. "Then tell me." Emma froze, the words caught in her throat. Part of her wanted to deflect, to change the subject or brush him off, but the sincerity in his voice stopped her. She sighed, her fingers tracing patterns on the countertop. "I'm divorced," she said finally, the word feeling heavy as it left her mouth. "As of yesterday, 10 years, gone. My ex cheated on me with someone he works with, someone younger, prettier, more everything. And now I'm here, trying to figure out who I am and what's left of my life." Liam didn't react immediately, his expression thoughtful. When he finally spoke, his tone was calm but firm. "You're wrong about one thing." Emma frowned, caught off guard. "What?" "That you're not enough. You are." The intensity of his words left her momentarily speechless. She looked away, focusing on the ocean beyond the window. "You don't even know me," she said softly. "Maybe not," he admitted, "but I know what it's like to feel like you're not enough. To let someone else make you believe it." Emma's head snapped back to him, her brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" Liam hesitated, his fingers drumming lightly on the table. "Let's just say I've been in your shoes before, betrayed by someone I trusted. It's not an easy thing to come back from." The weight of his admission hung between them, unspoken but palpable. Emma studied him, seeing something deeper in his expression, something raw and vulnerable beneath the polished exterior. She realized in that moment that he wasn't as untouchable as she had assumed. Before she could respond, the sound of heels clicking against the floor broke the moment. A striking woman entered the kitchen, her tailored dress hugging her figure and her sharp features softened only by her perfectly styled hair. She exuded confidence, her presence commanding the room. "Liam," she said, her tone smooth but pointed, "I didn't realize we had company." Liam's jaw tightened, his demeanor shifting. "Julia, this is Emma Carter. Emma, my sister, Julia Harrington." Emma stood awkwardly, unsure whether to extend a hand. Julia's smile didn't reach her eyes as she looked Emma up and down, her gaze lingering on Emma's wrinkled dress. "How unexpected," Julia said, her voice dripping with polite disdain. "I assume you'll be heading out soon?" Emma opened her mouth to reply, but Liam cut in, his tone firm. "Emma's my guest. She'll leave when she's ready." Julia arched a perfectly groomed brow, her gaze flicking between them. "Of course. My mistake." She turned and left as quickly as she had appeared, her heels clicking like a metronome against the marble floor. The tension she left in her wake was suffocating. "I should go," Emma said, standing abruptly. "I've already imposed enough." "You're not imposing," Liam said, his voice steady. "Stay, please." Emma hesitated, her mind racing. Everything about this situation felt overwhelming, like she had been pulled into a world she didn't belong in. But something in Liam's eyes stopped her from leaving. "Okay," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'll stay." For the first time in a long while, Emma felt like she was standing at the edge of something new, terrifying, unpredictable, and undeniably intriguing. The late afternoon light bathed the Harrington estate in a warm golden glow, softening its modern angular edges. Emma found herself wandering through the sprawling house, unsure whether she was exploring or trying to escape her own thoughts. Every room seemed to whisper of wealth and control, pristine surfaces, perfectly arranged furniture, and walls adorned with abstract art that likely cost more than her yearly salary. It wasn't her world. It couldn't be. And yet, here she was, an uninvited guest in a billionaire's sanctuary. Emma paused in the hallway, drawn to the sound of soft piano music drifting from one of the rooms. She followed it, her steps hesitant, until she reached a sunlit sitting room. Liam sat at a sleek black grand piano, his fingers gliding effortlessly over the keys. The melody was haunting, each note carrying a weight of emotion that made Emma's chest tighten. She leaned against the doorway, watching him. There was something raw about the way he played, his usual composed demeanor stripped away, leaving only vulnerability. For a moment, he seemed utterly unaware of her presence, lost in the music. When the final note lingered in the air, Emma clapped softly. Liam turned, startled, but his expression softened when he saw her. "I didn't know you played," she said, stepping into the room. Liam shrugged, his hands resting on the keys. "It's just a hobby, something my mother taught me before she passed." Emma's heart sank at the mention of his mother, and she hesitated before asking, "How old were you?" 14, Liam replied, his voice quiet. "She was the only one in my family who understood balance. She believed there was more to life than money and power." The admission caught Emma off guard. She had expected him to dodge personal questions, to deflect with charm or aloofness. Instead, he was opening a door, letting her glimpse a part of him that few likely saw. "I'm sorry," Emma said softly, sitting on the edge of a nearby chair. "She sounds like she was an incredible woman." "She was," Liam said, his gaze distant. Then he shook his head, as if shaking off the memory. "What about you? What keeps you grounded?" The question made Emma pause. She wanted to answer honestly, but the truth felt tangled in the aftermath of her divorce. "I don't know anymore," she admitted. "I used to think it was my marriage, my work. But now I feel like I'm just drifting." Liam studied her, his blue eyes piercing. "Maybe that's not such a bad thing. Sometimes you need to let go of the old to make space for something new." Emma let his words settle, their meaning both comforting and unnerving. The moment was interrupted by Julia's sharp voice echoing from the hallway. "Liam, a word." Emma turned to see Julia standing in the doorway, her arms crossed and her expression tight. Liam's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "I'll be right back," he said to Emma, standing and following his sister out of the room. Emma watched them go, the tension between them palpable. She waited a moment before curiosity got the better of her. Rising from her seat, she wandered toward the hallway, her steps silent. She knew eavesdropping was wrong, but something about Julia's demeanor unsettled her. Voices filtered through the crack in the door to Liam's office. "What are you thinking, bringing someone like her here?" Julia's voice was sharp, dripping with disdain. "She needed help," Liam replied evenly. "I wasn't going to leave her on the street." Julia scoffed. "You barely know her. For all you know, she could be a liability." "Not everyone has an agenda, Julia," Liam said, his tone colder now. "You don't have to like it, but this is my house, my decision." Emma's stomach twisted. She backed away, the weight of Julia's words pressing down on her. She didn't need a reminder that she didn't belong here. It was painfully obvious. Her instinct to leave returned in full force, but before she could act on it, Liam's voice followed her down the hall. "Emma?" She froze, turning slowly to see him standing at the end of the corridor. His expression softened when he noticed her wide eyes. "How much of that did you hear?" "Enough," Emma admitted, her voice tight. "It's clear I'm a problem." "You're not a problem," Liam said firmly, stepping closer. "Julia's just protective. She doesn't trust easily." "Protective or judgmental?" Emma countered, crossing her arms. "Because it sounds like she thinks I'm here to take advantage of you." Liam sighed, running a hand through his hair. "She's wrong. I don't care what she thinks." "But I do," Emma said, her voice breaking slightly. "You barely know me, Liam. And she's right. I don't belong here." Liam's gaze locked onto hers, steady and unwavering. "You belong wherever you choose to be. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise." Emma wanted to believe him, but doubt lingered. "Why are you doing this? Why help me? You have no reason to." Liam hesitated, his jaw tightening. "Because I've been where you are, lost, uncertain. I know what it's like to feel like the world is against you." He stepped closer, his voice softening. "And because I see something in you, Emma, something worth believing in." The weight of his words left her breathless. She searched his face, looking for any sign of insincerity, but all she found was honesty. "Okay," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'll stay." That night, as Emma lay in the unfamiliar bed, her thoughts churned. Liam's words replayed in her mind, mixing with Julia's accusations and her own insecurities. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in a long time, she felt something new, a faint flicker of hope, fragile but undeniable. What she didn't realize was that the cracks beneath the surface of this seemingly perfect world were deeper than she could have imagined, and as her connection with Liam grew, those cracks would threaten to shatter everything. The next morning, Emma found herself sitting on the balcony of her guest room, a steaming cup of coffee warming her hands. The ocean stretched endlessly before her, its surface shimmering under the early sunlight. Despite the breathtaking view, a sense of unease lingered in her chest. She replayed the previous day in her mind. Liam's quiet intensity, Julia's cutting words, and her own wavering confidence. This wasn't her life. She didn't wake up in mansions or share breakfasts with billionaires. She didn't sit on balconies overlooking private beaches, wondering how she'd ended up tangled in someone else's world. But here she was. The sharp knock on the door startled her. Emma set her cup down and crossed the room, opening the door to find Liam standing there. He looked as polished as ever, dressed casually in a dark sweater and slacks that somehow made him appear effortlessly powerful. In his hand he held a tablet. "Good morning," he said, his voice calm but businesslike. "I thought you might want to see this." Emma stepped aside, letting him in. He walked to the small sitting area by the window and placed the tablet on the table. She followed, hesitant, and sat across from him. "What is it?" she asked, her voice cautious. Liam tapped the screen, bringing up a series of sleek design mock-ups. "Your work," he said simply. Emma blinked, leaning closer to examine the images. They were her design's logos, brand concepts, website layouts. She recognized every detail, from the crisp fonts to the carefully chosen color palettes. "How did you get these?" she asked, her voice sharp with surprise. "You left your portfolio open on your laptop yesterday," Liam said, his tone unapologetic. "I took a look." Emma's cheeks burned with a mix of embarrassment and frustration. "That's invasive," she said, crossing her arms. "You had no right." "Maybe not," Liam admitted, leaning back in his chair, "but you're incredibly talented. Why haven't you pushed this further?" The question caught her off guard. Emma fumbled for a response, her mind racing. I was working on it," she said finally. But then life happened. The divorce, losing confidence. It all just fell apart. Liam studied her for a long moment, his gaze uncomfortably direct. "Life happens to everyone, Emma. What matters is what you do with it." The words stung, not because they were harsh, but because they were true. Emma looked down at her hands, her fingers twisting the edge of her sweater. She had spent so much time dwelling on what she'd lost that she hadn't thought about what she could rebuild. "So what are you suggesting?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm suggesting you use this," Liam said, gesturing to the tablet. "Your work deserves to be seen. If you need resources, connections, anything, I can help." Emma stared at him, her heart pounding. It was an incredible offer, almost too good to be true, but something about it made her uneasy. "Why?" she asked. "Why would you do that for me?" Liam's expression softened, his usual guarded demeanor slipping just enough for her to see the sincerity beneath. "Because I know what it's like to need a second chance," he said quietly. "And because I believe in you." Before Emma could respond, Julia appeared in the doorway, her sharp heels clicking against the marble floor. Her presence was like a storm cloud darkening the room. "Am I interrupting?" Julia asked, her tone clipped. Liam turned to her, his jaw tightening. "We're in the middle of something." Julia arched an eyebrow, her gaze flicking to Emma. "So I see." Emma shifted uncomfortably, feeling like an intruder in the tension-filled exchange. Julia stepped farther into the room, her arms crossed. "Liam, we have a meeting with the advisory board in an hour," Julia said pointedly. "Or did you forget?" "I didn't forget," Liam replied, his tone calm but firm. "I'll be there." Julia's eyes lingered on Emma for a moment longer, her gaze cold and assessing, before she turned and left. The sound of her heels echoed down the hallway, leaving an awkward silence in her wake. "She doesn't like me," Emma said after a moment, her voice flat. Liam sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Julia's complicated. She's protective of the family's reputation, sometimes to a fault. Don't let her get to you." "That's easier said than done," Emma muttered, her frustration bubbling to the surface. "She made it pretty clear she thinks I'm some kind of liability." Liam leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "Julia doesn't know you, but I do, and I trust you, Emma. That's what matters." His words were meant to reassure her, but they only made her feel more conflicted. Trust. It was such a simple word, yet it carried so much weight. Could she trust him in return? Could she trust herself to navigate this strange new world without losing who she was? Later that evening, Emma found herself wandering the grounds of the estate. The air was cool, the sky painted in deep hues of orange and pink as the sun dipped below the horizon. She walked aimlessly, her thoughts swirling. Liam's offer was generous, almost impossibly so, but Julia's pointed remarks echoed in her mind, planting seeds of doubt. Was this really about her talent, or was she just some kind of project to him? Someone he could fix to ease his own guilt or loneliness? As she reached the edge of the property, Emma stopped and stared out at the ocean. The waves crashed against the rocks below, their rhythm steady and unyielding. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to feel the full weight of her uncertainty, her fear, her hope. She didn't have the answers yet, but she knew one thing: her life was no longer defined by the shadows of her past. Whether she succeeded or failed, this was her moment to decide who she wanted to be. The days blurred into a strange rhythm for Emma, each one pulling her deeper into Liam's world. She spent her mornings sketching and refining designs, fueled by a cautious but growing sense of purpose. Afternoons brought conversations with Liam, his insight and encouragement chipping away at her doubts. And then there were the evening's quiet walks along the beach, stolen moments where the lines between business and something more began to blur. But beneath the surface, cracks were forming. One crisp morning, Emma was in the study, poring over a new concept for a project Liam had suggested. Her tablet screen glowed softly in the warm light streaming through the windows. She was so absorbed that she didn't notice Julia until her sharp voice broke the silence. "You're awfully comfortable here." Emma looked up, startled. Julia stood in the doorway, her arms crossed and her gaze steely. She was impeccably dressed as always, her presence exuding authority and precision. "I'm just working," Emma said carefully, keeping her tone neutral. "Liam asked me to refine these for the pitch." "Of course he did," Julia replied, stepping into the room. Her heels clicked against the floor, a sound that set Emma's nerves on edge. "But don't mistake his generosity for permanence. Liam has a habit of collecting projects." Emma frowned, her fingers tightening around the tablet. "I'm not a project." Julia tilted her head, a faint smirk tugging at her lips. "Aren't you? He found you at your lowest, brought you here, gave you resources, guidance. It's noble, really, but don't get too comfortable. When the novelty wears off, Liam moves on." The words stung, each one landing like a sharp jab. Emma opened her mouth to respond, but Julia raised a hand, cutting her off. "I'm not saying this to be cruel," Julia continued, her tone softening just slightly. "I'm saying it because you need to be realistic. My brother has a lot on his plate: investors, board members, the future of the company. Don't let yourself believe this is more than it is." Julia's words lingered long after she left the room, planting seeds of doubt that Emma couldn't shake. She spent the rest of the day distracted, her focus splintered as she questioned her place in this world. Was Julia right? Was Liam's support just another act of philanthropy, a fleeting kindness rather than genuine belief? That evening, Emma found herself in the kitchen, staring out at the darkened ocean while absent-mindedly stirring a cup of tea. The house was quiet, the usual hum of activity replaced by an unsettling stillness. "You look like you're miles away." Liam's voice came from behind her, pulling her from her thoughts. Emma turned to find him leaning casually against the doorway, his expression curious. He was dressed down in a simple sweater and jeans, a far cry from his usual polished look. Somehow, it made him seem more approachable, though it didn't ease the knot in her stomach. "Just thinking," Emma said, forcing a smile. Liam walked closer, his gaze softening. "About what?" Emma hesitated, her fingers tightening around the mug. She didn't want to voice Julia's accusations, not when she wasn't sure how much truth they held. Instead, she deflected. "About whether I'm really cut out for this, for any of it." Liam frowned, pulling out a chair and sitting across from her. "What makes you think you're not?" "I don't know," Emma said, her voice quiet. "Maybe it's imposter syndrome, or maybe I just don't belong here." "You do," Liam said firmly. "You're talented, Emma, more than you give yourself credit for." For a moment, Emma felt herself soften under his words. But then the doubts resurfaced, fueled by Julia's warnings. "What if I'm just a distraction?" she asked, her voice trembling. "What if all of this is just temporary?" Liam's expression hardened, his jaw tightening. "Did Julia say something to you?" Emma hesitated, caught between honesty and self-preservation. She implied that you have a history of taking people under your wing and then moving on. Liam exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. Julia means well, but she doesn't always know when to stay out of it. She's protective of me, sometimes to the point of being overbearing. So she's wrong, Emma pressed, her voice quiet but insistent. Yes, Liam said without hesitation. You're not a project, Emma. I don't see you that way, and I'm not going anywhere. The sincerity in his voice was undeniable, and yet Emma couldn't shake the lingering fear that she was setting herself up for another fall. She looked away, staring into her tea as her mind raced. I don't know if I can handle getting hurt again, she admitted. Liam reached across the table, his hand brushing against hers. The contact was light but grounding, a reminder of the connection they had built. I'm not Connor, he said softly, and I'm not going to let you down. Emma looked up, meeting his gaze. For the first time since her divorce, she felt a flicker of hope, tentative and fragile, but real. She nodded, the smallest of smiles tugging at her lips. Okay. The moment was interrupted by the shrill ring of Liam's phone. He glanced at the screen, his expression darkening. I have to take this, he said, standing. Stay here. I'll be back. As he disappeared down the hall, Emma's gaze lingered on the spot where he had stood. She wanted to believe him, to trust that his words were genuine. But the doubt Julia had planted refused to disappear completely. Hours later, long after Liam had retreated to his office and the house had gone quiet, Emma wandered outside. The air was crisp, the stars scattered like diamonds across the dark sky. She walked along the beach, the sand cool beneath her feet, and let the sound of the waves drown out her thoughts. Standing at the water's edge, she made a silent vow to herself. Whatever happened, whether Liam's intentions were genuine or not, she would rise from this experience stronger. She would no longer define herself by the betrayals of her past or the doubts of others. As the waves lapped at her feet, Emma felt a sense of clarity. She couldn't control what Liam or Julia thought of her, but she could control how she moved forward, and that was a power she was finally ready to claim. The next morning, the ocean breeze carried the faint scent of salt and seaweed into the house. Emma stood in front of the bedroom mirror, her reflection staring back with a mix of apprehension and resolve. Today felt different, like the fragile hope she'd been nurturing was ready to take root, despite the lingering doubts Julia had planted. She smoothed her hair, tying it back into a loose ponytail, and chose a simple outfit, dark jeans, a fitted blouse, and a cardigan. Her mind buzzed with plans for her design concepts, each detail sharper than it had been in months. For the first time since her divorce, she felt a sliver of her old confidence returning. When Emma stepped into the kitchen, she found Liam already there, leaning against the counter with a cup of coffee in hand. He looked up as she entered, a small smile softening his otherwise serious expression. "Morning," he said, setting the cup down. "You're up early." "I couldn't sleep," Emma admitted, pouring herself a cup of coffee. She hesitated before adding, "I've been thinking about the project." Liam's brow lifted, curiosity flickering in his eyes. And I want to do it," she said firmly. "Not because I need your help, but because I believe in the work. I believe in myself." A genuine smile broke across Liam's face, and he nodded. "That's what I wanted to hear." They spent the morning working side by side in the study, poring over designs and refining details. Emma's doubts began to fade as she lost herself in the creative process, her mind buzzing with ideas and solutions. Liam offered insights, his feedback precise but encouraging. Their dynamic felt natural, as though they had been collaborators for years. But just as they hit their stride, Julia entered the room, her presence as cold and sharp as ever. "Liam," she said, her tone clipped, "we need to talk." "Now." Liam glanced at Emma, his expression apologetic. "Excuse me," he said, standing and following Julia out of the room. Emma's chest tightened as the door closed behind them. She could hear their muffled voices in the hallway, Julia's sharp and insistent, Liam's calm but firm. Unable to resist, Emma moved closer to the door, straining to catch their words. "She doesn't belong here," Julia said, her voice rising. "This isn't her world, Liam. She's going to drag you down." "That's enough, Julia," Liam replied, his tone low and controlled. "Emma is talented, driven, and more than capable of holding her own." "She's a liability," Julia shot back. "You're too close to see it." There was a long pause before Liam spoke again, his voice softer but no less resolute. "I trust her, Julia. That's all you need to know." The words sent a rush of warmth through Emma's chest, but they were quickly overshadowed by the weight of Julia's hostility. She backed away from the door, her heart pounding. The doubts she had fought so hard to suppress clawed their way back to the surface. Later that evening, Liam found Emma sitting alone on the balcony, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. The sky was streaked with deep purples and oranges, the sun sinking slowly into the horizon. "Mind if I join you?" he asked. Emma shook her head, and Liam pulled up a chair beside her. For a moment, they sat in silence, the rhythmic sound of the waves filling the space between them. "Julia's wrong about me," Emma said finally, her voice quiet but steady. "I'm not here to take advantage of you. I'm not a liability." "I know," Liam said, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Julia's protective, but she doesn't know you like I do." Emma turned to him, her eyes searching his face. "Why do you trust me, Liam? Why take this risk?" Liam hesitated, his expression thoughtful. "Because I see something in you. Resilience, integrity, the ability to see the world differently, creatively, authentically. That's rare, Emma, and it's worth fighting for." Emma's throat tightened, emotion threatening to overwhelm her. "I've been so afraid of failing again," she admitted, "of losing myself like I did before." "You're not going to lose yourself," Liam said firmly. "Not this time." The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Emma threw herself into her work, channeling every ounce of energy into the project. Liam was by her side, offering support and guidance, but never overshadowing her. Slowly, her confidence grew, each completed task a small victory in reclaiming her sense of self. But the turning point came unexpectedly. One afternoon, Emma received an email from a prestigious design firm she had applied to months ago, before her life had unraveled. They had seen her recent work shared by Liam with her permission and were impressed. They wanted her to present her portfolio at their upcoming showcase. Emma stared at the email, her hands trembling. She had spent so long feeling invisible, doubting her worth, but now an opportunity she had once dreamed of was within reach. She looked at Liam, who had just entered the room. "I got an invitation," she said, her voice shaking. "They want me to present my work." Liam's smile was radiant. "That's amazing, Emma. You've earned it." The day of the showcase arrived, and Emma stood backstage, her nerves threatening to get the better of her. She wore a sleek black dress, simple yet elegant, and clutched her notes tightly in her hands. Liam appeared beside her, his presence grounding. "You're going to be incredible," he said, his voice calm and reassuring. Emma nodded, taking a deep breath. "Thank you for everything." Liam smiled. "You don't need to thank me. This is all you." When Emma stepped onto the stage, the room fell silent. She began her presentation, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her. She spoke about her journey, her struggles, her doubts, and how she had found her voice again. Each slide of her portfolio felt like a testament to her resilience. By the time she finished, the room erupted into applause. Emma's chest swelled with pride and relief, her smile genuine and unrestrained. Backstage, Liam was waiting, his expression filled with admiration. "I told you," he said, pulling her into a brief, warm hug. "You were incredible." For the first time in a long time, Emma believed it. Months later, Emma stood in her own small design studio in Manhattan, her work displayed proudly on the walls. The space was hers, a reflection of her journey and the person she had become. Liam visited often, their connection growing stronger with each passing day. Emma had found her footing, her strength, and her voice. And as she looked toward the future, she knew one thing for certain. Her past no longer defined her. This was her story now, one of resilience, ambition, and the courage to embrace the unexpected. Emma's journey reminds us all that life's most unexpected turns can lead to the most profound transformations. From heartbreak to hope, she proved that resilience and self-belief can pave the way to a brighter future. Her story isn't just about finding love, it's about rediscovering herself and embracing the life she truly deserved. If this story moved you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell for more inspiring and dramatic tales. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.
The air at the Sterling-Rossi wedding tasted of money, old new, and oceans of it. Lilies imported from Dutch glass houses fought a losing battle against the cloying scent of 1,000 competing perfumes. Isabella Rossi, 7 months pregnant and radiant, in a gown that cost more than a suburban house, felt a single cold drop of sweat trace its way down her spine. Her fiancé, Richard Sterling, the man who was supposed to be waiting for her at the end of the aisle, was missing. And in the pit of her stomach, where their child kicked softly, a primal instinct screamed that this was no simple case of cold feet. She was about to discover a betrayal so profound it would not only shatter her heart, but threaten to bring 2 corporate empires crashing to the ground. The union of Isabella Rossi and Richard Sterling was less a romance and more a coronation. It was the merger of 2 dynasties, a meticulously planned corporate maneuver, wrapped in the fairy tale trappings of a high society wedding. The Rossis, with Isabella at the helm of their marketing division, commanded a global luxury goods empire. Rossi lifestyle, built on Italian craftsmanship and timeless elegance. The Sterlings, a colder, sharper dynasty of American finance, were led by Richard's formidable mother, Victoria Sterling. Their firm, Sterling Holdings, had its tendrils in every corner of the global market. The marriage was the final seal on a multi-billion-dollar merger agreement, a pact that would create a conglomerate of unparalleled power, Sterling Rossi Global. To the outside world, Isabella and Richard were the perfect couple. She was the warm, creative heart. He was the charming, ambitious face of new money. Their courtship had been a whirlwind of paparazzi flashes, charity galas, and weekend trips to Monaco on the Sterling private jet. Richard had courted her with the kind of grand cinematic gestures that left gossip columnists breathless. He'd once filled her Milan apartment with 1,000 white orchids, her favorite simply because she'd had a stressful week. He'd written her name in the sky over the Hamptons. He was attentive, devoted, and seemed utterly captivated by her. But a gilded cage is still a cage. Isabella's brother, Leo Rossi, never trusted him. Leo, 2 years her senior, was the stoic, watchful CEO of the Rossi empire. He had the soul of an old-world craftsman and the mind of a shark. "He performs for you, Bella," he'd told her a month before the wedding, his voice low and serious over a glass of Barolo in his study. "No one is that perfect. He's playing a role, and you need to figure out what his script is." Isabella had dismissed it as brotherly overprotectiveness. "You see everyone as a business opponent, Leo. He loves me, and I love him." Her love was genuine. She saw past the polished Sterling veneer to a man she believed was simply trying to live up to the impossible expectations of his mother. Victoria Sterling was a woman carved from ice and ambition, She viewed emotion as a liability and affection as a currency to be dispensed sparingly and strategically. She approved of Isabella not as a daughter-in-law, but as a priceless asset. The pregnancy, which they had announced 3 months prior, had only increased Isabella's value in Victoria's cold calculus. A male heir would solidify the dynasty. The wedding preparations had been a military-grade operation orchestrated by Victoria. The venue was a historic Long Island estate, its sprawling lawns rolling down to the calm, grey waters of the Sound. The guest list was a who's who of global finance, European aristocracy, and Hollywood royalty. Every detail was curated to scream power. The champagne was vintage, the orchestra was from Vienna, and the 5-tier wedding cake was a confectionery marvel flown in from Paris. The week leading up to the ceremony had been a blur of contractual meetings disguised as family dinners. Lawyers outnumbered cousins. The talk was of stock options, board seats, and brand synergy. Richard, usually so attentive, had become distant, his phone a permanent fixture in his hand. He'd wave away her concerns with a dazzling smile. "Just last-minute merger madness, my love. The price of building our empire. After Saturday, it's just you, me, and the little one. I promise." He had a best man, Marcus Thorne, who was also a senior VP at Sterling Holdings. Marcus was slick and obsequious, always laughing a little too loudly at Richard's jokes, his eyes constantly scanning the room. Isabella found him unnerving. He had a way of looking at her, a flicker of something she couldn't quite name. Resentment, perhaps, or a predatory hunger that was deeply unsettling. She'd mentioned it to Richard once, who had simply laughed it off. "Marcus, he's harmless, a bit of a suck-up, but he's been my right hand for years. Don't you worry your beautiful head about him." On the morning of the wedding, the bride's suite at the estate was a flurry of activity. Her mother, Sophia Rossi, a woman whose warmth was a direct contrast to Victoria's frost, was fussing with the lace on her veil. Her bridesmaids, a giggling trio of her oldest friends from university, were sipping champagne. But Isabella couldn't shake a deep, gnawing anxiety. She hadn't seen Richard that morning. He had stayed at a nearby hotel with Marcus, as per tradition, but he had promised to come to her suite for a private moment before the chaos began, just the two of them. He was an hour late. She'd called him twice. The first time it went straight to voicemail. The second time he'd answered his voice breathless and rushed. "Sorry, darling. Got held up. Marcus needed me for something. A little best man crisis. I'm on my way now. I love you." But there was a noise in the background, a faint feminine giggle. Before she could ask, he'd hung up. "Everything all right, Cara?" her mother asked, her gentle hands stilling on her shoulders. Isabella forced a smile. "Fine, Mama. Just nerves." But it wasn't nerves. It was a splinter of doubt lodged deep in her heart that was beginning to fester. She walked to the grand window of the suite, which overlooked the perfectly manicured gardens where hundreds of guests were already beginning to gather. She saw Victoria Sterling holding court near the grand floral arch, a triumphant queen surveying her kingdom. She saw Leo standing apart, his hands clasped behind his back, his jaw tight as he stared toward the main house. Their child chose that moment to give a strong, decisive kick. Isabella placed a hand on her stomach, a silent promise running through her. "I will protect you, always." The words were a vow, though she did not yet know the war she was about to declare. The drop of sweat completed its journey down her back, and the fairy tale began to curdle. The stage was set, the audience was waiting, but the leading man had gone off script, and Isabella was about to become the director of an entirely different kind of show. The minutes stretched into an eternity, each one taut with an unspoken tension that began to suffocate the joyous atmosphere of the bride's suite. The laughter of her bridesmaids became forced. The bubbles in their champagne seemed to die with a fizz of anxiety. Isabella's phone remained silent on the antique vanity, a sleek black mirror reflecting her perfectly made-up face, a mask of serene beauty that was beginning to crack at the edges. "He'll be here," her friend Jessica said, a little too brightly. "You know what grooms are like. Probably lost his cufflinks or something." But Isabella knew Richard. He was meticulously organized, a trait hammered into him by his mother. He didn't lose things. He didn't run late for appointments of this magnitude, not unless he was distracted. The wedding planner, a severe woman named Ms. Albright with a headset permanently attached to her ear, appeared at the door. "5 minutes, Ms. Rossi. Your father is waiting downstairs. The guests are seated." Her eyes darted around the room, noting the absence of the groom. A flicker of professional panic crossed her face before being ruthlessly suppressed. "He was supposed to be here," Isabella said, her voice quiet. "I'm sure he's on his way to the altar." Ms. Albright chirped, though her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Shall we?" Isabella took a deep breath, the boning of her custom-made gown feeling suddenly like a straitjacket. "I need a moment. Please. Just tell my father 2 more minutes." As soon as the door clicked shut, she looked at her brother's number and pressed call. He answered on the first ring. "Where is he, Leo?" she asked, dispensing with pleasantries. Leo's voice was grim. "I don't know. Marcus is out there by the archway, looking like the cat that swallowed the canary. He told me Richard was composing himself. Victoria is starting to look murderous, and not in her usual way." A new wave of nausea washed over her, this one having nothing to do with her pregnancy. "Leo, he called an hour ago. He said he was with Marcus. I heard a girl laugh." Silence on the other end of the line. When Leo finally spoke, all traces of forced calm were gone. His voice was cold steel. "Where are you, Bella?" "In the suite. They want me to start walking." "Don't move," he commanded. "Don't go anywhere. I'm coming up. Something is wrong." The call ended. Isabella stood frozen in the middle of the opulent room. Her friends watched her, their earlier cheerfulness replaced by a shared silent dread. The scent of lilies was now overwhelming funereal. It was the scent of decay. She had to know. "I need some air," she announced, her voice surprisingly steady. She began walking toward the door, her heavy train whispering behind her. "Bella, wait," her mother cried out. "Your dress, you can't go out there." But Isabella didn't stop. She moved with a purpose that scattered her entourage like birds. She swept past Ms. Albright in the hallway, ignoring her frantic protests. She ignored the confused looks from caterers and staff. Her instincts were a roaring fire in her gut, guiding her steps, pulling her not towards the garden, not towards the ceremony, but in the opposite direction, down a secluded corridor that led to the estate's private wing. The library, the billiards room, and a series of small private studies reserved for the estate's owners. It was a part of the house the guests were not meant to see. The air here was still and cool. The thick carpet absorbed the sound of her footsteps. She passed the grand library, its doors firmly shut. She passed the billiards room. And then she saw it. At the end of the hall, the door to the smallest study, the one with the old mahogany desk and the view of the secluded woods, was slightly ajar. A sliver of light cut across the dark hallway, and from within she heard a sound that would be seared into her memory forever. It wasn't a giggle this time. It was a soft, breathy moan. Her blood ran cold. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. For a moment, she couldn't breathe, couldn't move. Her hand, clutching the bouquet of white peonies and roses, began to tremble violently. The baby inside her was still, as if sensing the impending shockwave. This was a dream, a nightmare. It had to be. In a moment, she would wake up in her bed, and Richard would be there, and this horrible, suffocating feeling would be gone. Then she heard his voice, low and husky, a voice she knew better than her own. "We don't have much time." He said his words punctuated by another soft, feminine sound. Anger, white hot and volcanic, erupted through the ice of her shock. It propelled her forward. Her trembling stopped. Her hand was steady. She didn't throw the door open. She pushed it slowly, silently. The scene that greeted her was a tableau of obscene betrayal. It wasn't a quick, stolen kiss. It was far, far worse. Her Richard, was there, his perfectly tailored wedding tuxedo jacket thrown carelessly over a chair. His bow tie was undone, hanging loosely around his neck, and his shirt was unbuttoned, revealing his chest. He was leaning against the large mahogany desk, and in his arms, her body pressed against his, was a woman. Isabella recognized her instantly. It was Scarlett Dubois, a junior analyst from Sterling Holdings, a pretty brunette with ambitious eyes whom Richard had once dismissed as eager but harmless. Scarlett's dress, a slinky emerald green number completely inappropriate for a morning wedding, was hiked up high on her thighs. Her hands were tangled in Richard's hair. Her lipstick, a garish shade of crimson, was smeared around her mouth. And on the desk, next to a half-empty glass of what looked like whiskey, sat Richard's phone. They hadn't seen her. They were lost in their sordid little world, just meters away from where their families, their friends, their entire world awaited their union. Isabella didn't scream. She didn't cry. A strange, terrifying calm washed over her. It was the calm of the eye of a hurricane, a pocket of absolute stillness before total devastation. She took one step into the room. The heel of her shoe clicked on the hardwood floor just inside the doorway. It was the only sound needed. Richard's head snapped up. His eyes widened first in confusion, then in pure, unadulterated horror. The color drained from his face, leaving him looking pasty and sick. He shoved Scarlett away from him so abruptly that she stumbled backward, nearly falling. "Bella." He choked out his voice, a strangled whisper. It's not what it looks like." It was the oldest, most pathetic cliché in the book, and it was the spark that lit the fuse. Isabella looked from his panicked face to Scarlett's, who was now staring at her with a mixture of fear and defiance. She looked at his undone shirt, at the smeared lipstick, at the jacket, lying discarded like a promise he'd just thrown away. Then her gaze fell to the phone on the desk. She said nothing. She simply turned and walked away. "Bella, wait. Please." Richard's desperate cry followed her down the hall. She heard him scrambling, fumbling to fix his clothes to chase after her. But just as he reached the hallway, another figure appeared, blocking his path. It was Leo. His face was a mask of thunderous rage. He had seen her face as she emerged from the corridor, and he had understood everything in an instant. "You are not taking one more step toward my sister." Leo snarled, his voice a low, dangerous growl. He placed a firm hand on Richard's chest, stopping him cold. Isabella didn't look back. She kept walking her back straight, her head held high. She walked past the confused staff, past Ms. Albright, who was now babbling into her headset. She walked to the grand staircase where her father, a kind man with a gentle face, was waiting for her, his expression a mixture of pride and confusion. "Isabella, what's wrong? Where have you been?" he asked, his voice full of concern. She looked at her father, the man who had always protected her, and for the first time a single tear escaped and traced a path through her perfect makeup. She wiped it away with the back of her hand. "The wedding is off," she said, her voice ringing with a clarity that cut through the air. She didn't wait for his response. She lifted the microphone from the small podium that had been set up for the officiant. Her hand was rock steady. She walked past the stunned string quartet, past the floral arch, and stood before the hundreds of seated guests. The murmuring crowd fell silent, their faces a sea of confusion. They saw a bride impossibly beautiful standing alone at the altar. They expected a tearful announcement of a delay. They expected an apology. They got a revolution. The silence that fell over the garden was absolute. It was a heavy, breathless void, filled only by the distant cry of a seagull and the rustle of leaves in the sea breeze. Hundreds of pairs of eyes were fixed on Isabella, a solitary figure in white against a backdrop of obscene floral abundance. In the front row, Victoria Sterling's face had tightened into a mask of confused displeasure. She started to rise a silent command for Isabella to step down, but a sharp look from Leo, who had now taken a position a few feet to his sister's right, froze her in place. Isabella's knuckles were white where she gripped the microphone. She could feel the baby, a tiny, innocent life, nestled safely inside her. That thought was her anchor. It was her strength. She wasn't just a jilted bride. She was a mother, protecting her child from a legacy of lies before it could even begin. She lifted the microphone to her lips. Her voice, when it came, did not tremble. It was clear, resonant, and carried the cold, hard weight of undeniable truth. "Good morning, everyone," she began, her gaze sweeping across the assembled crowd, deliberately avoiding Richard's family. "I want to thank you all for coming here today to celebrate what was meant to be a joyous occasion." A nervous titter went through the crowd. This was not the expected script. "I have a brief announcement to make," she continued, her voice gaining strength. "There will be no wedding today." A collective gasp rippled through the guests. Phones previously tucked away out of politeness began to emerge from pockets and purses. Victoria Sterling was now fully on her feet, her face ashen, her eyes shooting daggers at Isabella. "The union between the Rossi and Sterling families, and by extension the merger between our companies, is hereby cancelled, effective immediately." This was no longer a personal drama. It was a corporate bombshell. Murmurs erupted into a low roar. Men in tailored suits began speaking urgently into their phones. The stock market wasn't open on a Saturday, but they knew the bloodbath that would ensue on Monday morning. "Bella, stop this!" Victoria's voice was a sharp, piercing shriek that cut through the noise. "You are hysterical. What is the meaning of this?" Isabella finally turned her eyes to Victoria. There was no fear in her gaze, only a chilling, profound pity. "You should ask your son, Victoria," she said, her voice dropping yet still carrying across the amplified system. "You should ask him what he was doing just a few moments ago in the estate's private study." At that moment, Richard finally appeared at the edge of the garden, skidding to a halt on the manicured grass. He had managed to straighten his clothes, but his face was a wreck of sweat and panic. Marcus Thorne was beside him, whispering frantically in his ear. Scarlett was nowhere to be seen, having evidently made a swift and cowardly exit. "Bella," "Don't do this," Richard shouted, his voice cracking with desperation as he started to push his way through the stunned guests. "Let's talk about this in private." "In private?" Isabella laughed, a short, sharp, bitter sound that held no humor. "You mean like you and your mistress were just minutes before you were supposed to pledge your life to me, to our child?" The word mistress hung in the air, an accusation so vulgar and direct, it shocked the refined crowd into another stunned silence. The word child was a second blow twisting the knife of betrayal. Everyone knew she was pregnant. The crime was now doubled a sin against both a wife and a mother. Her eyes found Richard in the crowd. He froze, his face a mess of guilt and terror. "I believe the woman's name is Scarlett Dubois," Isabella announced, her voice precise and unforgiving. "She's a junior analyst at Sterling Holdings. For those of you on the board, you might want to review your company's policies on fraternization, especially when it involves the CEO-to-be actively cheating on his pregnant fiancée during his own wedding." Every detail was a nail in the coffin. She wasn't just airing dirty laundry. She was meticulously documenting the crime for the whole world to see. She named the woman, her position, the company, the location, the timing. It was a masterclass in controlled demolition. Richard looked utterly broken, exposed. He looked to his mother for help, but Victoria was staring at him with a look of pure, unadulterated fury. He had not just embarrassed the family. He had single-handedly torpedoed her life's work, the merger in the most public and humiliating way imaginable. He had proven himself to be exactly what she feared most, a weak, foolish boy ruled by his basest impulses. Isabella's gaze softened for a fraction of a second as she looked at her own family. Her father's face was a canvas of shock and dawning rage. Her mother was weeping silently. And Leo was looking at her with an expression of fierce, absolute pride. He gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. "I've got you." She turned back to the crowd. "I apologize for wasting your time," she said, her formal tone returning. "But I believe in transparency, and I will not begin a marriage, a family, or a business partnership based on a foundation of such profound disrespect and deceit." She placed the microphone carefully back on the stand. The silence was broken by the sound of her footsteps on the stone path as she walked back the way she came. It was the most powerful walk of her life. She didn't run. She didn't stumble. She moved with the grace and dignity of a queen abdicating a throne she had just discovered was made of filth. As she reached the archway, she unclasped the sterling diamond, the ridiculously large engagement ring Richard had given her. It felt cold and foreign on her finger. She held it out to Leo as he met her. "See that our lawyers get this back to them," she said, her voice a low murmur, "along with a bill for half of this catastrophe." Leo took the ring, his hand closing over it. "Consider it done." "What now?" "Now," Isabella said, taking her brother's arm and not looking back at the chaos erupting behind them. "We go home, and then we go to war." The fairy tale was over. The carefully constructed facade had been shattered into a million pieces. As the Rossi siblings disappeared into the house, leaving the Sterling Empire to implode in a garden of dying lilies, one thing was clear. This was not an ending. It was a beginning. The beginning of a drama that would make the cancelled wedding look like a minor skirmish in a much larger, more brutal conflict. The sleeping giant of the Rossi family had been awakened, and hell hath no fury like a billionaire heiress scorned. The drive from the Long Island estate back to Isabella's Manhattan penthouse was a study in surreal silence. Leo drove the black Maybach with a focused intensity, navigating the traffic as if it were a hostile battleground. Isabella sat in the passenger seat, staring out at the blur of the city, her hand resting protectively on her stomach. The adrenaline of the confrontation had begun to fade, leaving behind a deep, hollow ache that settled in her bones. She wasn't crying. The betrayal felt too vast, too seismic for tears. It was a tectonic shift in the landscape of her life, and she was still surveying the wreckage. Her phone, which she'd left in the bridal suite, had been retrieved by Leo's security detail. When they finally entered the quiet, sun-drenched expanse of her penthouse overlooking Central Park, her head of security, a stoic ex-Mossad agent named Gabriel, handed it to her. "It hasn't stopped, Miss Rosie," he said, his voice impassive. "We've identified 37 unique numbers from the Sterling family and their associates, and over 200 calls from blocked numbers we assume are media." "Turn it off," Leo commanded. "Bella doesn't need to hear from any of them." "No," Isabella said, her voice surprisingly firm. She took the phone. "I want to see the groveling." She powered it on. The device vibrated violently in her hand as a tsunami of notifications flooded the screen. Voicemails, text messages, missed calls. Most were from Richard. She clicked on the most recent voicemail, putting it on speaker. Richard's voice, thick with manufactured tears and genuine panic, filled the room. "Bella. My God. Bella, I am so sorry. You don't understand. It was a mistake. A stupid, meaningless mistake. She means nothing to me. It was Marcus. He kept pouring me drinks, saying I was nervous. Scarlett was just there. I don't even know how it happened. Please just talk to me. We can fix this. I love you. I love our baby. Don't throw this all away because of one moment of insanity." Isabella listened with a detached curiosity, as if studying a particularly loathsome insect under a microscope. "He blames Marcus. He blames the alcohol. He calls her meaningless. He hasn't taken one shred of responsibility." She observed, her voice clinical. She deleted the voicemail without a second thought. The next was from Victoria. Her tone was not apologetic. It was furious. "Isabella, you have made a catastrophic error in judgment. Whatever foolishness Richard engaged in it was a private matter. To detonate it publicly, to jeopardize a multi-billion-dollar merger out of pure emotional hysterics, is unforgivable. You have proven yourself to be exactly the kind of liability I feared. Call me back when you have decided to act like an adult and salvage this situation, not for Richard's sake, but for the sake of our shareholders." Leo let out a short, harsh laugh. "She's worried about the shareholders, of course. Her son humiliates you in the worst possible way, and her first thought is the stock price." "It's all she knows," Isabella said, deleting Victoria's message as well. She scrolled through the texts. Pathetic apologies from Richard. Demands from his father. Even a bizarrely threatening message from an unknown number that read, "You just made a very powerful enemy, you little bitch." She suspected it was Marcus Thorne. She tossed the phone onto the marble island in her kitchen. "Lawyers," she said to Leo, "get our legal team on a conference call. I want the merger dissolution papers drafted by Monday. I want a press release from Rossi Lifestyle by noon tomorrow, stating our position clearly. I want our PR team to get ahead of this narrative. I am not the hysterical woman. I am the CEO who uncovered a fatal flaw in a potential partner's leadership and acted decisively to protect my company's interests." Leo was already on his phone, his fingers flying across the screen. "Done. I'm calling Marco, then Julia from Pier. What about the personal side?" Personal side, Isabella repeated the words as if they were from a foreign language. There is no personal side anymore. He made it business when he cheated with a company employee. He made it business when he risked our family's name. Victoria made it business when she called me a liability to. The next 48 hours were a blur of calculated strategic warfare. While the Sterlings were in panicked damage control, fielding calls from irate board members and trying to spin a narrative of a troubled emotional bride, the Rossi team launched a surgical PR strike. Their press release was a masterpiece of corporate speak, framing the cancelled wedding and merger as a fundamental divergence in corporate ethics and leadership values discovered at a critical juncture. It never mentioned cheating, but the implication was clear. They were the stable, honorable party, extricating themselves from a toxic partner. The media, smelling blood, went into a frenzy. Paparazzi camped outside Isabella's building and the Sterling Holdings headquarters. Gossip sites published grainy photos of Scarlett Dubois fleeing the wedding venue, her face hidden in shame. Her identity, her job, her social media profiles, everything was dug up and put on public display. She became the digital Scarlet woman torn apart by an anonymous online mob. Isabella felt a flicker of pity for her, but it was quickly extinguished by the memory of Scarlett's defiant smirk in that study. Meanwhile, Leo was dismantling the financial ties that had already begun to bind the two companies. He was ruthless. Joint accounts were frozen. Preliminary integration budgets were clawed back. A penalty clause in the initial merger agreement, one Leo himself had insisted upon covering, breaches of good faith and personal conduct by key principals was invoked. It would cost Sterling Holdings hundreds of millions of dollars. Isabella spent most of her time in her penthouse, a gilded fortress against the storm outside. Her mother Sophia had arrived, bringing with her the scent of home-cooked food and unconditional love. She didn't offer advice or judgment. She simply sat with Isabella, held her hand, and let her be silent when she needed silence and rage when she needed to rage. The rage came on the third day. Isabella was standing in the nursery she had so lovingly designed. It was a serene space of soft creams and gentle greys, with a hand-painted mural of a whimsical forest on one wall. A tiny crib stood assembled in the corner. She ran her hand over the smooth wood, and suddenly the full weight of her loss crashed down on her. It wasn't just the loss of a husband, but the loss of a dream of the family she thought she was building for her child. She let out a guttural sob, a sound of pure animal pain. And then she began to dismantle the room. She didn't break anything. Her actions were deliberate, methodical. She folded the tiny clothes and placed them back in their boxes. She took down the mobile of soft, felted stars. She pushed the crib against the wall. She was erasing Richard, erasing the future they were supposed to have, clearing the space for a new one she would have to build alone. Later that evening, Leo came to her apartment. He found her in the now barren nursery, sitting in the rocking chair, staring at the blank space where the crib had been. "The market's open today," he said, softly, leaning against the doorframe. Isabella didn't turn. "How bad was it?" "Worse than we thought." "For them," Leo clarified. Sterling Holdings dropped 17% at the opening bell. The financial press is calling it the Sterling implosion. Our stock, on the other hand, is up 3%. The narrative is holding we're seen as the strong, stable ones who dodged a bullet. A grim satisfaction settled over her. "Good. There's more," Leo said, his tone shifting. "Something's not right. The penalty clause I invoked, Sterling's lawyers are fighting it, which is expected, but their arguments are weak, almost distracted. And I've been looking at some of the preliminary financial data we shared during the due diligence phase. There are anomalies. This caught Isabella's attention. She turned to look at her brother. What kind of anomalies? Small things. Discrepancies in growth projections for certain offshore assets. A few encrypted data packets that our tech team flagged as unusual during the transfer. At the time, we chalked it up to Sterling's sloppy data management. But now, I don't know. It feels different. He walked further into the room. Think about it, Bella. The affair was stupid. It was arrogant. But the timing, on the morning of the wedding at the venue itself, it's almost too perfect, too self-destructive. Richard is weak and entitled, but is he suicidal? A new thought, cold and sharp, cut through Isabella's grief. Leo was right. The sheer brazen stupidity of Richard's actions was hard to reconcile. It was a level of recklessness that bordered on the theatrical. "What are you suggesting?" she asked. "I'm suggesting," Leo said, his eyes narrowing, "that maybe the affair wasn't the main event. Maybe it was a distraction, a smokescreen designed to cause exactly this kind of chaos. The question is, what was it meant to hide? The world, which had just been shattered, shifted again. Isabella had thought she was at the center of a drama about love and betrayal, but the cold dread creeping into her heart suggested she had been a pawn in an entirely different game. One with stakes that might be far higher than a broken heart and a cancelled wedding. The unraveling, she realized, had only just begun. The seed of doubt Leo had planted grew into a thicket of suspicion in Isabella's mind. For the next 2 weeks, while the world feasted on the scraps of her personal drama, she and her brother initiated a covert operation. They assembled a small, trusted team, Marco, their head of legal, Julia, their PR chief, a forensic accountant named Anya Sharma, who had a reputation for finding needles in digital haystacks, and Gabriel, their head of security, who was tasked with digging into the lives of Richard Marcus Thorne and Scarlett Dubois. Isabella worked from her penthouse, which had been transformed into a war room. The large dining table was covered in laptops, financial reports, and timelines. The grief was still there, a constant, dull ache, but it was now overlaid with a cold, energizing fury. She had been played. Her pain, her humiliation, her child's future, it had all been collateral damage in a game she didn't even know she was playing. Now she wanted to know the rules, and she wanted to burn the whole game board to the ground. Anya Sharma struck first. "The anomalies Leo flagged are real," she announced during a late-night conference call, her voice crisp and excited. "During the due diligence data transfer, Sterling Holdings sent us several large encrypted archive files containing their projections and asset valuations. Standard procedure. But buried within 3 of those archives were ghost protocols, essentially hidden programs that ran in the background while our servers were analyzing the data." "What did the programs do?" Isabella asked, leaning forward, her coffee forgotten. "They didn't steal anything," Anya said. "That would have triggered alarms. They did something much smarter. They made micro-alterations to our own predictive models. Tiny, insignificant changes to algorithm variables that over time would have skewed our valuation of their assets, specifically their new tech and derivatives divisions, making them appear more stable and profitable than they actually were." Leo swore softly in Italian. "So they weren't just showing us fake numbers. They were hacking us to make us believe their fake numbers were our own idea." "Exactly," Anya confirmed. "It's brilliant and terrifyingly subtle. The financial discrepancy would have been a rounding error at first, but post-merger it would have become a black hole. Sterling Rossi Global would have been carrying billions in toxic, overvalued assets from their side of the ledger. Within a year or two, it would have triggered a catastrophic devaluation. A corporate Trojan horse, Isabella whispered, the pieces beginning to click into place. Victoria would never sanction that. She's ruthless, but she's not stupid. A collapse like that would destroy the Sterling name forever. Which means someone else at Sterling Holdings was running this play. Leo concluded, his voice grim. Someone who stood to gain from the chaos. The spotlight fell squarely on two people, Richard and Marcus Thorne. At the same time, Gabriel's report landed on Isabella's desk. It was a deep dive into the lives of her ex-fiancé and his best man. Richard's profile was predictable, a history of lavish spending, a string of short-term relationships with models and actresses, and a deep-seated psychological need for his mother's approval. But Marcus Thorne's profile was far more interesting. On the surface, he was the loyal number 2. But Gabriel's team had dug deeper. Marcus came from a family that had been rivals with the Sterlings 2 generations ago, before his own family's fortune had collapsed. He had joined Sterling Holdings with a chip on his shoulder, working his way up while living in Richard's shadow. Gabriel had also uncovered a series of encrypted communications and offshore bank transfers. Marcus was living far beyond his declared salary, and the money trail led to a holding company registered in the Cayman Islands. The final piece of the puzzle was Scarlett Dubois. Gabriel's team found that she wasn't just a random ambitious analyst. Her university tuition had been paid for by an anonymous scholarship fund. A fund that Gabriel, through painstaking digital forensics, traced back to the same Cayman Islands holding company that was financing Marcus Thorne. He's been cultivating her for years, Isabella breathed, staring at the interconnected lines she had drawn on a whiteboard. She was his asset. He placed her inside the company, probably instructed her to get close to Richard, knowing Richard's weakness for a pretty face and a bit of ego stroking. It's a classic intelligence operation, Gabriel stated. Thorne is the handler, Dubois is the honey trap. The full horrifying picture began to emerge. This was Marcus Thorne's endgame. He wasn't Richard's friend. He was his nemesis, playing a long, patient game of revenge and ambition. So here's the play, Leo said, pacing the room, piecing it together. Marcus plants the Trojan horse in the merger data. He knows it will eventually cripple the new company, but that's not enough. He wants to take over. He needs to discredit the Sterling leadership, namely Richard, and cause a crisis that sends the stock price plummeting. The affair, Isabella finished, her voice laced with ice. It was the perfect catalyst. He goads Richard, who is already a willing fool, into a situation he knows Richard can't resist. He makes sure it happens at the most public, most damaging time possible. He wanted me to find them. He wanted the public explosion. It wasn't just about stopping the merger. It was about cratering Sterling Holdings' value. So he could trigger a hostile takeover, Anya added. With the stock in freefall, the company would be vulnerable. He and his backers, whoever is behind that Cayman account, could swoop in and buy up a controlling interest for pennies on the dollar. He gets his revenge on the Sterlings. He gets the company, and he gets to be the hero who rescues it from the ashes. Leo summarized, shaking his head in disbelief at the sheer Machiavellian audacity of the plan. It was all there. The cheating scandal wasn't the story. It was the cover. Isabella's public humiliation had been a meticulously planned strategic move in a corporate coup. The realization didn't lessen her pain, but it transformed it. The grief of a victim was replaced by the cold, calculating rage of a queen who had been used as a pawn in a commoner's coup. Richard, Isabella said the name, testing it. Where does he fit? Is he a total idiot, or was he a willing participant? I think he's a fool, not a conspirator, Leo reasoned. Marcus likely sold him a different story. Sow some wild oats before you settle down. Have one last fling. He played on Richard's ego and insecurities. Richard thought he was just being a playboy. He had no idea he was the sacrificial lamb. Isabella stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the city lights. They seemed sharper now, colder. She had been betrayed on a level she could scarcely comprehend. Her heart had been broken to create a market opportunity. "They underestimated me," she said, softly, her reflection staring back at her from the dark glass. "They all did. Richard thought I was just a prize. Victoria thought I was an asset. And Marcus thought I was a hysterical woman who would just cry and cancel a wedding." She turned back to the room, her eyes burning with a new fire. "He's right about one thing. I did cancel the wedding. Now I'm going to cancel his entire future." She looked at Leo, at Anya, at Gabriel. "We have the proof of the financial fraud. We have the connection between Marcus and Scarlett. We have the motive. It's time to stop playing defense. It's time to show them what a Rossi does when you threaten our family and our house." The serpent had played his game, but he had made a fatal error. He had attacked the lioness in her own den, and he had forgotten that she had claws of her own. The war for Sterling Holdings was about to enter a new bloody chapter, and Isabella Rossi, the scorned bride, was about to become its unlikely conqueror. Isabella did not move with the speed of a woman seeking vengeance. She moved with the cold, deliberate precision of a master chess player setting up a checkmate. For a week, she did nothing, letting the public narrative solidify. Sterling Holdings continued its slow-motion collapse. The stock had stabilized, but was still down almost 30% from its pre-wedding value. Board members were in open revolt, and Victoria Sterling was fighting a losing battle to maintain control her every move, hampered by the public disgrace of her son. Marcus Thorne, meanwhile, was playing his part perfectly. He was the picture of loyalty, publicly defending the Sterling family, while privately telling key investors and board members that Richard was an unstable liability, and Victoria had lost her touch. He was positioning himself as the only viable successor, the steady hand needed to guide the company through the storm he had created. The first move of Isabella's counterattack was silent and devastating. Through a neutral third-party law firm based in Geneva, Leo, acting on Isabella's instructions, forwarded Anya Sharma's entire forensic report on the Trojan Horse data breach to the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Department of Justice. The report was submitted anonymously, flagged as a whistleblower complaint originating from within Sterling Holdings itself. It detailed the attempted fraud, the ghost protocols, and the potential for massive shareholder deception without once mentioning the Rossi family. 2 days later, federal agents walked into the Sterling Holdings headquarters in Midtown with a warrant. They seized servers, computers, and files. The raid made national news, sending a fresh shockwave of panic through the investment community. The stock, which had been limping, now nosedived into a catastrophic freefall. The narrative was no longer about a cheating fiancé. It was about systemic, high-level corporate fraud. Victoria and Richard were blindsided. They had been so focused on the personal scandal that they had no idea a financial guillotine was hanging over their heads. Isabella's second move was targeted at Marcus Thorne himself. While the federal investigation paralyzed the company, Gabriel delivered a dossier to her. It contained irrefutable proof of the offshore account, the payments to Scarlett Dubois, and the crown jewel, a secretly recorded audio file. Gabriel's team had managed to recover a conversation between Marcus and one of his co-conspirators, a disgruntled board member from a cloud backup. In the recording, Marcus laid out his entire plan. The sabotage of the merger, the use of the affair to spook the filly, his disgusting term for Isabella, and his strategy to trigger a hostile takeover using funds from their Cayman Islands entity. Isabella didn't leak the audio. That would be too simple, too chaotic. She decided to deliver the blow herself. She requested a meeting with the Sterling Holdings Board of Directors. The request, coming from the woman at the center of their company's downfall, was met with stunned confusion. But her family was still a major player in the global market, and refusing her would look weak. They agreed, holding the meeting in their cavernous, wood-paneled boardroom, the very heart of the Sterling Empire. Isabella walked into that room, not as a victim, but as a conqueror. She was dressed in a sharply tailored crimson suit, the color of power and blood. She was visibly pregnant, a silent testament to the personal cost of the drama, but her demeanor was pure steel. Leo was by her side, his presence a silent warning. Victoria Richard and the entire board, including a smug-looking Marcus Thorne, were seated around the massive table. Victoria's face was a mask of cold fury. Richard couldn't even look at her. He stared at the table, a broken man. "Thank you for seeing me." Isabella began, her voice calm and clear, filling the tense silence. "I know my presence here is unexpected. I am not here to relitigate the personal events of the past few weeks. I am here to talk about the future of this company." "You have no right to be here," Victoria snapped. "You have done enough damage." "On the contrary," Isabella replied, her eyes locking with Victoria's. "I am here because I am the only person in this room who knows the full truth of why your company is burning to the ground, and it has very little to do with my cancelled wedding." She looked directly at Marcus Thorne, whose smug expression was beginning to falter, replaced by a flicker of alarm. "For weeks you have all been operating under the assumption that this crisis was caused by a personal indiscretion. You are wrong. The affair was merely a tool, a brightly colored flag waved to distract the bull while the matador prepared the killing blow." She nodded to Leo, who placed a small, sleek speaker on the center of the table. "I believe you all know Marcus Thorne," Isabella said, her voice dropping. "You see him as Richard's loyal right hand, the future of this company, perhaps. But I'd like to introduce you to the real Marcus Thorne." She pressed play. Marcus's voice filled the boardroom, arrogant and chillingly clear. "The beauty of it is the simplicity. We let pretty boy Richard hang himself with his own zipper. The girl Scarlett played her part perfectly. The pregnant fiancés, the filly spooks, just like I said she would. She cancels everything, makes a big dramatic scene. The stock tanks on the personal drama. Then while they're all running around putting out that fire, the feds get the anonymous tip about the merger data. By the time they figure out what's really going on, we've already bought up 30% of the stock from the Caymans. We rescue the company. I take the throne. The Sterlings are history." The silence that followed the recording was heavier than a tombstone. Every eye in the room turned to Marcus Thorne. His face was the color of ash. He half rose from his chair, sputtering, trying to form a denial, but no words came. He was utterly, completely exposed. Victoria Sterling looked as if she had been turned to stone. The betrayal from her son was one thing, but this was a viper she had nurtured in her own nest, a man who had plotted the utter destruction of her life's work, while smiling to her face. Isabella pressed a second button, and an email was sent simultaneously to everyone in the room. "That is the audio file. You will also now have a full dossier detailing Mr. Thorne's offshore accounts, his conspiracy with certain members of this board, and his long-term cultivation of Scarlet Dubois as a corporate espionage asset. I have taken the liberty of forwarding this entire package to the lead investigator at the SEC. I believe they will find it very illuminating. Marcus Thorne sank back into his chair. A dead man walking. His career was over. His freedom was next. Isabella finally allowed her gaze to fall upon Richard. He was staring at her, his eyes filled with a desperate, pathetic plea for a forgiveness he would never receive. He finally understood that he had not been a player, but a pawn. He had lost everything: his fiancée, his child, his company, his family's respect. Not for a passionate mistake, but as a calculated move in someone else's game. It was a truth more damning than any affair. As of this morning, Isabella announced, her voice ringing with finality, Rossi Lifestyle, through a subsidiary investment fund, has acquired a 28% stake in Sterling Holdings, purchased on the open market at its current distressed value. We are now the single largest shareholder. She let that bombshell settle. She owned them. We will be calling for an emergency shareholder meeting to remove the current board and install new leadership. My brother Leo Rossi will act as interim chairman. We will cooperate fully with the federal investigation. We will rebuild this company based on the Rossi values: integrity, transparency, and strength. She stood up. Her point made her victory absolute. She had not just weathered the storm. She had harnessed its power and used it to conquer her enemies. She walked toward the door, pausing only when she was level with Richard. She looked at him, not with hatred, but with a final dismissive indifference. "You were right about one thing, Richard," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "It was a meaningless mistake. You are a meaningless man." With that, she turned and walked out of the boardroom, leaving behind the smoldering ruins of the Sterling dynasty. She stepped out into the bright Manhattan sunshine, took a deep breath of the free air, and placed a hand on her stomach. The baby kicked a steady, strong rhythm. It was a new world, a new future. One she had secured not as a bride, but as a warrior. A queen who had faced down betrayal and built an empire from the ashes. And so the fairy tale wedding ended not with a kiss, but with a hostile takeover. Isabella Rossi walked away from the wreckage, not as a heartbroken victim, but as a triumphant queen who had turned the deepest betrayal of her life into her greatest victory. She proved that the strongest empires aren't built on contracts and mergers, but on unbreakable integrity and the fierce, unyielding power of a woman determined to protect her own. Her story is a powerful reminder that sometimes the most devastating endings are merely the foundation for glorious new beginnings. What would you have done in Isabella's shoes? Could you find the strength to not only walk away, but to fight back and win? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of resilience, justice, and ultimate empowerment resonated with you, please hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Thank you for listening.